The cabin shook as though the storm outside had hands, clawing at the metal skin of the jet. The overhead lights flickered. Plastic compartments rattled. A sour smell of burnt coffee hung in the stale air. Somewhere near the back, a child wailed, his voice swallowed by the thunder that cracked across the ocean sky. Passengers prayed in whispers, some pressing phones to their mouths, recording what might be their last words. Then came the voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain has collapsed. I need assistance. Combat flight experience, anyone at all. Please respond." The plea came raw through the intercom. The voice of a young man teetering on the edge of panic. In seat 22B, a woman stirred. She had been in the uneasy doze of someone long accustomed to sleeping in hostile places, her head tilted against the window, her arms folded tight. Her name was Lila Morgan, 34, dressed in simple clothes, hair pulled back with no thought for style. She lifted her head slowly, as though surfacing from a deep, private ocean. Up front, a man's laugh cut the tension. Dry, dismissive. He rose from his plush first-class seat, adjusting a silk tie as if preparing for a board meeting. Edward Hallstrom, corporate mogul, wealth carved into every gesture. He spoke loudly, so the whole cabin could hear. "Nobody with real training is back there. Pilots don't fly coach." His words carried the smug certainty of someone who had always been listened to. The intercom cracked again. "Please, I cannot manage this alone." The jet bucked. A water bottle rolled down the aisle. A woman screamed as luggage banged overhead. Edward puffed his chest. "My brother-in-law flies private jets. I've flown beside him countless times. I can help." He stepped forward, already savoring the performance of competence. A flight attendant hurried toward him, face pale, breath short. "Sir, this situation requires military-level skill. Civilian training won't—" "Are you doubting me?" Edward's voice sliced the air. "I've invested fortunes to avoid situations like this, and I will not watch my family die because you refuse my help." The words pressed Lila deeper into invisibility, as though her presence weighed less than the storm hammering at the fuselage. She sat still, her fingers curling against the fabric of her seat. The cabin lurched again, a violent dip that made teeth clatter. Someone shouted that the engines sounded wrong. A teenage girl crossed herself again and again, whispering. Lila stood. No sudden rush. No raised voice, just the quiet certainty of motion that turned heads without demanding them. She began to walk up the aisle, her steps balanced against the turbulence. Conversations stilled, though the silence wasn't respect. It was disbelief. She reached the attendant. "Excuse me, I'm Lila Morgan, former Air Force major. I logged more than 500 hours in F-16s. I can handle this storm." Her words seemed to hang in the recycled air. Edward's mouth twisted, half sneer, half laugh. "You've got to be kidding. We're entrusting our lives to that?" He gestured at her jeans, her plain shirt, her skin that carried none of the sheen of wealth. "Credentials, please, or is this just bravado?" She met his gaze without flinching. For a moment the plane felt still, as though even the storm leaned closer to listen. Then she spoke, calm and exact. She recited the emergency descent protocol for a wide-body jet in catastrophic turbulence. Word for word. Angle of descent. Pressurization adjustments. Radio codes. Technical language that tasted of training and lived experience. The storm roared. The passengers listened. The co-pilot appeared in the doorway, sweat streaking down his young face. His eyes darted through the cabin until they locked onto hers. He recognized something in her tone the others had missed. Authority born not from wealth, but from survival. Altitude 38,000, speed 450 knots, crosswinds brutal, over 100. His words came fast, instinctive, as though her composure steadied him. Edward's laugh cracked again, brittle. "Numbers don't make a pilot. Wikipedia could have taught her that. The plane dropped. Oxygen masks fell, dangling like nooses above every seat. Screams tore the silence apart. The jet rattled as if its bones would split. Lila never reached for the mask. She stayed upright, her hand braced against the seat frame, her eyes scanning the room as though each terrified passenger were a gauge to be read, measured, and balanced. She turned once, not to Edward, but to the cabin itself, voices caught in panic, faith slipping away. "There are 3 kinds of pilots," she said. "Those who fly when skies are calm, those who fly when they darken, and those who fly when the impossible closes in. I'm the last kind." Her words landed harder than the turbulence. A quietness spread, reluctant but undeniable. The co-pilot's voice cracked again. "The captain is seizing. I don't know what to do." Lila moved past him, through the cockpit door, vanishing into the storm-lit space where control and catastrophe collided. She did not look back. Edward sank into his seat, his confidence leaking out with each breath. His wife's hand slipped from his, her eyes fixed on the closed cockpit door. For the first time in decades, Edward Hallstrom felt it. Not fear of the storm, not even fear of death. Something worse. The hollow, humiliating certainty of being wrong. And Lila Morgan, a woman none of them had noticed until this moment, became impossible to ignore. The cockpit smelled of metal and panic. Red warning lights pulsed across the panels, bathing the cramped space in a fever glow. The captain's body jerked violently in his seat, foam streaking his lips. The young co-pilot hovered uselessly, hands trembling above the controls, torn between saving a man and saving 300 lives. Lila slid in behind him, her presence cutting through the chaos without permission or hesitation. "Move." Her voice was steady, low, carved from years of command. He obeyed before thought could intervene, retreating a step as she assessed everything at once. Gauges, instruments, the dying man, the storm that roared like artillery outside the windshield. "Name?" she asked. "Evan. Evan Price." His voice cracked. "Good. Evan. Monitor fuel and pressurization every 30 seconds. Keep your head clear. I'll handle the rest." The plane jolted. Metal groaned, a sound too close to pain. The co-pilot flinched, but she did not. Her hands moved over the controls, decisive, efficient. Not a wasted gesture. From behind, a new voice intruded. "This is madness." Edward had followed, forcing his way past the attendant. His face shone with sweat, his silk shirt plastered to him like paper. He planted himself at the threshold as if ownership of space were enough to claim authority. "She'll kill us all. Let me through." Lila didn't even look at him. "Evan, status." "Fuel steady. Cabin pressure stable." "Good." She adjusted pitch, angle, trim, each correction easing the jet into precarious balance. The storm hammered harder, yet inside the cockpit a fragile rhythm formed. Edward's voice rose, brittle, desperate. "I've flown in private jets across continents. I know aviation. I demand to speak to ground control." Lila's eyes never left the instruments. "This cockpit isn't a boardroom, Mr. Hallstrom. Go sit down." His face reddened, words tangling in his throat. He opened his mouth, but another voice broke through, measured, calm, carrying the weight of experience. "Let her work." A woman stepped into view, older, sharp-eyed. She carried herself with the composure of someone who had faced mortality too many times to be rattled by arrogance. Dr. Evelyn Cho, neurosurgeon. She knelt beside the captain, assessing his convulsions with clinical speed. "Major Morgan," she said, recognition flickering. "I served 3 years in military hospitals. I can manage his seizures while you fly." Lila's head dipped once. Respect exchanged in silence. "Do it." Evelyn slid in, her hands already at work, her voice calm even as alarms screamed overhead. Edward's protests faltered. He looked from one woman to the other, realizing too late that the room no longer revolved around him. The radio hissed. Lila reached for it, her movements fluid, practiced. Civil emergency frequency 121.5. This is Major Lila Morgan, requesting immediate identity confirmation with Andrews Air Force Base. The reply came almost instantly, sharp with disbelief. Major Morgan, call sign Sentinel, you disappeared off radar 20 minutes ago. We've been searching for you. Evan's eyes darted to her, shock widening them. Edward paled, words dying unspoken. Andrews, confirm. Captain incapacitated. Severe storm. Request priority landing coordinates. Sentinel, you have top priority. Baltimore is clearing a runway. Entire East Coast airspace is shut down, except for you. Lila's lips pressed into the faintest shadow of a smile. Not triumph. Focus. Evelyn glanced up from the captain. He's stable for now, but turbulence like this could kill him. Then we make the turbulence obey, Lila murmured, adjusting trajectory again. Edward's voice returned, weaker now, a frayed whisper. This is insane. Impossible. Lila finally turned, her gaze meeting his for the first time. Her eyes carried the weight of every mission flown, every doubt endured, every insult survived. Mr. Hallstrom, impossible is where I live. The jet dipped again, carving through the storm. Passengers screamed, some prayed, some wept. And yet, in the cockpit, something shifted, a fragile tether of belief, invisible but undeniable, binding strangers in the face of ruin. Evan straightened, shoulders firming. Evelyn's hands moved steady and sure. Even Edward, trembling, found himself silenced by the gravity of presence. The radio hissed again. Sentinel, this is General Hayes, Pentagon Air Operations. Reports confirm your past missions. We've cleared Dover Air Force Base as backup. Weather worsening. Winds exceeding 180. Baseball-sized hail incoming. You are the last plane in the sky. Evan's throat worked, dry. The last? Lila's hands gripped the yoke with the calm of inevitability. Yes, she said softly. And we're not falling. Lightning split the clouds, bright enough to blind. The plane shuddered as though struck. Alarms shrieked. Evelyn braced herself over the captain's body, protecting him from the jolt. Lila narrowed her eyes, hands dancing over the controls with precision no manual could teach. Evan, she said, we're going to spiral through the eye. It's never been done in a craft this size, but it will be done tonight. He blinked, the words landing like a commandment carved into stone. But that's impossible. Yes, trust me. The cockpit was a crucible of silence, broken only by alarms and the pounding of rain. Edward clung to the doorframe, lips moving soundlessly, caught between prayer and apology. Evan looked at her again, and something in her calm, unyielding, absolute, lit a fragile flame in his chest. He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Lila breathed deep, steady. Her grip tightened. The jet tilted into a descent that defied everything it was built for. Passengers screamed anew as gravity twisted their bodies against straps and armrests. Evelyn braced the captain, whispering calm into the storm. And in that suspended second, the whole aircraft seemed to balance on the edge of human faith. The plane dove, guided by a woman they had not seen until the sky itself forced them to. The spiral began. The aircraft tilted, not in the controlled descent passengers expected, but in a calculated curve that pressed every body into the seat. Oxygen masks swung like pendulums. Passengers clutched hands, prayers tangled with screams. A tray table snapped free and clattered across the aisle. From the cockpit, the storm was alive. Walls of cloud rose like black mountains. split by veins of lightning that lit the horizon in violent bursts. Rain battered the windshield in sheets, blurring the world into shifting grays. The jet felt too large, too heavy, a creature not meant to dance in such currents. Lila's hands never shook. Her movements were measured, each adjustment drawing the aircraft deeper into the spiral. It was reckless, yes, but it was also precision. The kind that had once guided her through skies filled with fire. Behind her, Evan's voice wavered. Vertical speed 4,000 feet per minute. Instruments screaming, This isn't in the manual." "Then throw the manual out," she said. Calm. Absolute. "Read me the data. Trust what I see." He swallowed hard, sweat streaking down his temples. Something in her steadiness seeped into him, anchoring his nerves. He read the gauges again, voice clearer. Fuel stable, airspeed holding, structure still intact. Evelyn looked up from the captain, her face tight but controlled. "He's holding steady for now, but if the G-forces spike, we risk cardiac collapse." "They won't," Lila said. Her eyes scanned the storm, searching for patterns no one else could see. She had lived too long in skies that wanted her dead, not to recognize the hidden corridors of survival. She leaned the yoke fractionally, guiding the jet into a shaft of relative calm within the chaos. Evan exhaled in disbelief. "How did you know that pocket was there?" 10 years of flying in places where storms weren't weather. They were weapons, she said. "When you survive long enough, you learn to see the invisible." The radio crackled. General Hayes's voice returned, hard-edged but urgent. "Sentinel, every radar station is tracking you. What you're attempting is unprecedented. Confirm, you are initiating controlled spiral descent through the storm eye?" "Confirmed." "You understand the risk?" "I live in risk," she said simply. In the cabin, fear spread like fire. Passengers clung to one another, bodies pinned by the descent. Edward stumbled back to his seat, face pale, knuckles white around the armrest. His wife looked at him with something colder than fear. Recognition. Recognition that the man who had always claimed control had none at all. Beside him, an elderly woman whispered, "She'll kill us." But then she paused, her gaze fixed on the cockpit door, the steady voice that had replaced chaos with command. Her whisper shifted. "Or she'll save us." The contrast was palpable. Where once disbelief ruled, now doubt began to fracture, replaced by something dangerous, hope. In the cockpit, Evan's voice broke the fragile silence. "We're through 10,000 feet, storm intensifying at lower layers. This descent, it might tear us apart." Lila's jaw tightened. "Not if we shape the fall. Adjust flaps, 10 degrees. He hesitated, then obeyed. The plane groaned but steadied, carving the storm instead of being carved by it. Evelyn's voice was low. "I've seen surgeons cut into impossible cases. But this feels like opening a skull in the middle of an earthquake." Lila allowed the faintest curve of a smile. "Exactly. And the patient survives." Edward's voice carried weakly from the doorway, as though dragged from him against his will. Who are you?" Lila didn't turn. "Someone you didn't see." The words landed heavier than the storm. Evan's readings spiked. "Crosswinds climbing, pressure dropping." "Hold steady," Lila said. She banked slightly, muscles taut but her mind fluid, already calculating outcomes no one else dared to imagine. The radio hissed again. "Sentinel, Pentagon confirms all civilian airfields closed. Your only safe harbor is Dover. Emergency teams on standby. Entire coast watching." Evan's voice cracked. "The whole coast?" "Yes," Lila said. "And we won't give them a tragedy." Lightning flared so close the cockpit lit white. Evan flinched, but Lila's eyes stayed forward, reading not the light but the shadows it revealed. Evelyn pressed a hand against the captain's chest, monitoring the faint rhythm. He's fading. Every jolt pushes him closer to arrest. Then we land before he slips, Lila said. Evan's voice trembled. Altitude 20,000, winds worsening, instruments redlining. This can't hold. Lila's grip tightened. She drew a long, steady breath, the kind she had taken before pulling into combat runs that manuals called suicide. Her words cut through the storm. Then we make it hold. In the cabin, passengers clutched hands harder. Someone began to sing softly, voice breaking, but the sound threaded through the terror like fragile silk. The song carried forward, through rows of fear, into the cockpit itself. Edward closed his eyes, for the first time, not to block the world out, but to admit he had never truly seen it. Evan called out again. Approaching 15,000. Turbulence hitting like cannon fire. Structure stress climbing past limits. Lila leaned into the yoke, every fiber of her body in rhythm with the jet. Limits are for people who quit. We don't quit. The plane dove deeper, carving its spiral through a storm that should have broken it. And then, an alarm shrieked new and merciless. Evan's voice cracked. Engine 2, flame out! The cockpit fell into a silence louder than thunder. Lila's eyes locked on the gauges, her mind already leaping ahead, calculating paths through catastrophe. Her voice, when it came, was steady as steel. Then we fly on one less heart. The alarm wouldn't stop. A relentless scream in the cockpit, drilling into every nerve. Evan's hands flew over the panel, sweat dripping down his cheek, his voice breaking. Engine 2, completely gone. Thrust imbalance building. We're fighting drag. The jet lurched sideways, rattling like it might shake itself apart. In the cabin, passengers cried out, bodies slammed against seatbelts, overhead compartments burst open, spilling bags into the aisles. Someone shouted a prayer so loud it broke into sobs. Lila's grip stayed unyielding, her gaze fixed on the gauges, on the storm twisting outside. We compensate. Evan, feed maximum to engines 1, 3, and 4. Adjust trim 4 degrees. His breath caught. That'll stress the remaining engines. It'll also keep us airborne, she said. Her calm cut through the panic. His shaking slowed. He obeyed, hands moving more surely now. The jet groaned in protest but steadied, its massive frame tilting into reluctant balance. From the floor, Evelyn kept her focus on the captain. She pressed her stethoscope to his chest, her brow furrowing. Heartbeat weak, rhythm unstable. If he doesn't get emergency care soon, he won't survive this descent. Then we'll give him a runway, Lila said, her voice sharp as a blade. Behind them, Edward clung to the doorway again, his face pale, his confidence stripped to bare fear. This is suicide. You can't land a crippled jet in a storm like this. You'll kill us all. Lila didn't turn. Sit down, Mr. Hallstrom, or I'll land you myself. The words struck harder than the turbulence. Edward recoiled, staring at her as though truly seeing her for the first time. The radio spat static, then a voice broke through. General Hayes again, urgent, authoritative. Sentinel, radar confirms engine loss. You are still descending into extreme conditions. Do you require military escort? Negative, Lila replied. An escort can't fly through this storm. This bird is mine. Hayes paused. Understood. Dover runway cleared. Emergency crews in place. But you need to know, storm intensity is climbing beyond record levels. You're flying through something we didn't believe possible. Possible or not, it's where we are, she said. Lightning split the sky again, violent white against endless black. For a heartbeat, the cockpit glowed like a war zone, shadows leaping across faces. Evan's jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the gauges. Evelyn steadied herself against the convulsing captain. Edward slid down against the doorframe, silent now, his arrogance drowned by fear and the quiet authority commanding the plane. The descent deepened. Air roared around the fuselage, a sound like tearing metal. The aircraft trembled under stress far beyond its design. Evan shouted over the alarms. "Altitude 10,000, crosswind spiking, structure strain at maximum tolerance." "Then we don't push the frame, we bend with it," Lila said, easing the yoke with a dancer's grace, tilting into the turbulence rather than against it. The jet shuddered, but the maneuver softened the impact, like water flowing around stone. Evan stared at her. How did you know to do that?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed locked forward, reading the storm the way others read words on a page. Finally, she said quietly, "I've flown through skies that wanted me dead. Once you learn to see intention in the air, you know how to answer it." Evelyn glanced up at her. "And you've carried that alone." Lila's jaw tightened. She didn't reply. Edward's voice, small now, bled through the hum of machines. I was wrong about you." She cut her eyes toward him for the briefest instant. Not anger, not triumph, just a flat acknowledgement, as though she'd heard those words too many times before, always too late to matter. Then her focus returned to the storm. The radio flared again. Andrew's base this time. "Sentinel, be advised, hail the size of fists moving into your path. If your windshield fractures—" "It won't," she interrupted. "Ma'am, statistics suggest—" "Statistics don't fly planes. Pilots do. Keep the frequency clear." The voice faded. Silence returned, save for the storm and the relentless alarms. Evan reported again, louder now. 8,000 feet. We're getting hammered. Airspeed dropping below safety margin. Feed more thrust. Don't argue." He did. The engines roared, strained to their limits. The plane surged, then steadied, fighting the storm like a beast refusing to die. In the cabin, passengers clung to each other. Some stared at the cockpit door, listening to the woman's voice over the intercom, her tone unyielding, commanding calm out of chaos. A teenage boy whispered to his mother, "She sounds like she's not afraid." "She is," the mother whispered back. "She just knows what to do with it." In the cockpit, Evan's readings spiked. His face went pale. "Engine 3 overheating. If we keep this up—" "Shut it down," Lila ordered. "What? That leaves us with 2—" "Shut it down before it shuts itself. Controlled loss is survival. Chaos isn't." His hands trembled, but he obeyed. The engine wound down, silence creeping into the storm's roar. The plane shuddered again, slower now, heavier. Edward's whisper broke the air. "We can't make it on 2. Lila's voice was calm, almost gentle. "We don't need 4 engines. We need 1 pilot who refuses to quit." The storm bellowed in reply, slamming the plane with crosswinds that made the metal scream. Evan gritted his teeth, reading out numbers that felt more like countdowns than measurements. 6,000 feet. Descent unstable. Airspeed critical. Lila drew a breath, the sound steady in the chaos. Her eyes locked forward, unblinking, unshaken. "We're not falling," she said. And then, as though to mock her, the jet dropped, a violent plunge that tore screams from the cabin and slammed every stomach into freefall. Evelyn threw herself across the captain's body, shielding him from the jolt. Evan clung to the controls with both hands, panic sparking in his eyes. Edward buried his face in his arms, sobbing now, his certainty shattered beyond repair. The descent steadied a fraction, but alarms still blared. 2 engines. A storm that defied record. A crippled captain. 300 lives bound to a single will. And in that suspended moment, as lightning carved the world in white, Lila whispered something only the storm could hear. "Not today." The plane was bleeding power. 2 engines gone, the remaining pair straining under the storm's merciless grip. The cockpit vibrated like a cage struck by hammers, every bolt screaming protest. Evan's voice cracked over the alarms. "Thrust imbalance worsening. We're losing altitude too fast." "Read me the numbers," Lila said. Her tone never wavered. 5,000 feet. Vertical speed climbing past safe descent. Crosswinds. Uncontrollable. "They're never uncontrollable," she murmured. Her hands guided the yoke with an intimacy that made the aircraft seem alive, a beast reluctant but obedient. She leaned it into the gale, coaxing rather than commanding. The jet steadied, barely. A reprieve measured in heartbeats. Behind them, Evelyn pressed her hands against the captain's chest, monitoring each fragile thud. Pulse weak, breathing shallow. He needs ground crews now or he won't last. "We'll give him ground," Lila said, her eyes fixed on the storm. Edward clung to the doorframe, his face hollow. His tie hung loose, his shirt soaked with sweat. He stared at her like a man trying to reconcile 2 impossible truths, that a woman he had dismissed was the only barrier between him and the abyss. His voice was thin, almost childlike. "How are you not afraid?" She didn't look at him. "Fear is constant. Control is optional." Her words cut him deeper than the turbulence. The radio hissed. A chorus of voices layered through static. Andrews again. "Sentinel, weather shows hail corridor ahead. If you can't clear it—" "I'll clear it," Lila interrupted. "Major, that's suicide. Impact could shatter your windscreen." Her gaze narrowed. Lightning lit her face in stark relief, steel and exhaustion and memory bound together. "Then I'll fly where the hail doesn't want to fall." Evan's jaw slackened. "That's guesswork." "No," she said. "It's experience." The cabin behind them had become a mosaic of human fragility. Children clutched at parents. Strangers held hands like old friends. A man whispered into his phone until the battery died, tears streaking his face. Through the intercom, Lila's voice threaded once more, calm and absolute. "This is Major Lila Morgan. I am in command of this aircraft. We are descending through a storm unlike any recorded. I need you to breathe, to trust, and to hold on. We will land. I promise you that." The cabin quieted, not into silence but into belief fragile enough to cling to. For the first time since the storm swallowed them, panic gave way to the faintest thread of order. Edward sat down slowly, his eyes wet, his hands trembling. His wife glanced at him but said nothing. The judgment was in her silence. In the cockpit, Evan scanned the gauges, disbelief shifting toward awe. "Altitude 4,000. Airspeed stabilizing. How are you doing this?" She didn't answer. Her eyes remained forward, her mind mapping patterns in the storm no radar could trace. Every flash of lightning, every shift in wind told her a story. She read it, wrote her own response with each flick of her wrist. Evelyn looked up, sweat beading at her hairline. "I've worked with neurosurgeons who cracked skulls mid-battle. You're doing the same thing, guiding precision through chaos." Lila's lips curved faintly. "Difference is, your patients don't weigh 300 tons. The doctor almost smiled, even as alarms howled. The plane lurched again, thunder booming so close it shook the controls. Evan shouted, "Structural stress at breaking point. If we keep pushing—" "We don't push," Lila snapped. "We flow." Her hands softened their grip, easing the descent into the rhythm of the storm itself. For a breathless moment, the turbulence eased, as though the storm accepted her presence rather than resisted it. Evan stared, his chest heaving. "That shouldn't be possible." "Neither should survival," she said. The radio burst alive again. General Hayes, urgent, strained. "Sentinel, Pentagon has confirmed. You saved 17 aircraft in hostile weather during Tempest Shield, didn't you?" "Yes," Lila said simply. Evan's mouth fell open. Edward's breath caught, shame flickering across his pale face. "Then," Hayes continued, "you're the only one who can attempt this. All airspace remains clear. Every eye in command is on you." The weight of those words pressed into the cockpit. Lila bore it without flinching. Evelyn whispered, almost reverent, "They're watching history." But Lila wasn't thinking of history. She was thinking of survival, of engines that burned too hot, of metal straining beyond its design, of 300 souls tied to her will. 3,000 feet, Evan called out. "Crosswinds 80 knots, turbulence off the scale, engines overheating again. Throttle back 3%, hold vertical speed." He obeyed, his trust in her no longer reluctant but absolute. The cabin roared with fear again as the jet dipped. Passengers pressed hard into seats. But beneath the cries, belief still lingered. Fragile. Growing. Edward lifted his face from his hands. His voice shook but carried. "Major Morgan." He faltered, swallowed, then forced the words out. "I believe you." For the first time, she looked directly at him. Her gaze was sharp, unreadable. She gave no thanks, no acknowledgement, only silence. Recognition wasn't a gift she owed. It had to be earned long before this moment. Evan shouted again, panic straining against control. 2,000 feet! Altitude dropping faster than target. This descent is unstable." Lila's breath steadied. Her eyes narrowed on the shifting gray horizon, the storm's maw opening wider below them. She felt it in her bones, in the pressure of the air, in the scream of the engines. She tightened her grip on the yoke. Her voice dropped, calm and absolute. "Then we make it stable." The storm roared in reply, lightning blazing white across the windshield. The plane plunged into shadow, and in that suspended moment, 300 lives waited on the edge of one woman's refusal to surrender. The descent was no longer a fall, but a battle. Every second, the jet fought to break apart. Every second, Lila bent it back into one piece. Evan's voice cracked through the alarms. "Altitude 1,800. We're almost below storm ceiling, but turbulence unmanageable." "Manage it," Lila said. Her hands danced across the controls with the precision of a surgeon, every movement measured in survival. The aircraft jolted so violently a panel ripped loose above their heads. Wires swung like veins exposed. Sparks hissed. Evan flinched, but Lila didn't turn her eyes from the windshield. "Stay focused," she told him. "If the plane sees your fear, it wins." Her words were strange, almost mystical, but they steadied him. His hands stopped trembling. He read the gauges again, louder this time. Vertical speed 3,000. Airspeed near stall threshold. Engines redlining. "We give them relief." She eased the throttle, coaxing the remaining engines like overworked horses. The roar dipped, but the plane steadied, a fraction of calm in chaos. Behind her, Evelyn's hands pressed firm against the captain's chest. His breaths came shallow, rattling, but still there. She looked up, sweat streaking her temples. "I don't know how long he can hold. Every jolt weakens him." "He'll make it," Lila said. "You can't promise that," Evelyn whispered. "I can," Lila replied, "because I've carried men home from worse." The storm lashed at the windows, hail hammering so loud it drowned thought. Cracks spidered across the windshield's surface, thin but menacing. Evan's face drained of color. "Windshield compromised. If it ruptures, it won't," she said. "Not while I fly." Edward's voice, thin and trembling, floated from behind. "You can't control glass. You can't control the sky. What happens when it decides to break?" Lila's jaw tightened. For the first time, her voice rose, cutting through the storm like steel. "I decide. Not the storm. Not the glass. Me." Silence fell in the cockpit, save for the alarms. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as though testing the resolve in her words. The radio crackled again. "Sentinel, this is General Hayes. We've rerouted all emergency crews to Dover. Foam laid, fire teams ready. You have absolute priority. Entire eastern seaboard is following your descent." Evan whispered, almost to himself, "The whole world is watching." "Let them," Lila said. "They'll see what it means to survive the impossible." Lightning split the clouds again, bathing the cockpit in white fire. For an instant, her face was carved in stark relief, calm, exhausted, resolute. A face that carried not just skill, but a history of being doubted, dismissed, overlooked. A face no longer invisible. In the cabin, the passengers felt it too. Fear was still there, sharp as ever, but something else rose beneath it. A quiet shift. The young boy who had been weeping clutched his mother's hand tighter, whispering, "She's going to save us." The mother, trembling, nodded as though willing herself to believe what she already knew. Edward sat hunched in his seat, his arrogance stripped bare. His wife's eyes lingered on him, a mixture of pity and disdain. He turned away, staring at the cockpit door, his lips moving silently. Not a prayer. An apology too broken to speak aloud. Evan's voice cut the air. "Altitude 1,000. Crosswinds still brutal. We're nearing stall." "Not yet," Lila said. "Engine 1 temperature critical. If it fails, then we fly with 1. I've flown with less." Evelyn glanced at her, disbelief etched into her features. "Less than 1? Lila didn't answer. Her silence carried its own weight. The plane dipped suddenly, the kind of drop that steals breath. Screams ripped through the cabin. Oxygen masks swung like pendulums in a mad dance. Evan gritted his teeth, fighting panic. 800 feet, airspeed dropping. We're too heavy. We'll never make the runway." "Yes, we will," Lila said. She pushed the nose down fractionally, trading altitude for speed, threading a needle no manual would dare suggest. The jet shuddered, metal howling under strain, but the stall warning cut off. Evan's eyes widened. "You just bent physics," she finished. The storm roared louder, as though enraged. Hail slammed the windows, cracks widening, one shard splintering inward with a hiss. Evan gasped, but Lila didn't flinch. Her gaze was locked forward, reading the storm like scripture. Through the fractured glass, the first glimpse of ground flickered below. Flooded fields, dark rivers, tiny pinpricks of light scattered like prayers. Evan's voice trembled. "We're almost there." "Almost isn't enough," Lila said. The radio burst again, urgent. "Sentinel, crosswinds at Dover exceeding safety limits. Any other pilot would abort." "I'm not any other pilot," she answered. Evelyn looked at her then, eyes sharp, voice low. "Why do you carry this?" "Alone. Why not let the world see who you are?" Lila's hands tightened on the yoke. For a heartbeat, her silence was heavier than the storm. Then she said, "Because the world only believes when it has no choice." Evelyn's gaze softened. "Then make them believe." The cockpit rattled as the plane tore through another downdraft. Evan shouted, 600 feet! Crosswinds off the chart! Runway approach unstable!" Lila steadied her breath. The storm pressed against them, unrelenting, but her hands were sure, her eyes unwavering. "Then we make the storm obey," she said. The plane bucked again, engines screaming, alarms howling. The runway lights flickered in the distance, blurred by rain and chaos. 300 lives hung suspended in the space between impossible and inevitable. And in that moment, with the storm clawing at every seam, Lila whispered into the roar, a vow only she could keep. "We land, no matter what breaks." The runway lights glimmered through the storm like a string of fragile stars, blurred and broken by sheets of rain. They seemed impossibly far, impossibly faint, yet they were the only thread between life and the abyss. Evan's voice cracked over the alarms. 500 feet. Crosswinds 90 knots. Approach unstable. We'll miss the center line. Not if we hold, Lila said, her voice even, though the yoke fought against her grip like a living thing. The aircraft bucked hard to the right, pressed by the gale. Lila countered, hands steady, eyes locked forward. The storm wanted the plane off balance, wanted metal to fold, wings to shear. She refused. Throttle 2% up, she commanded. Evan obeyed, his hands moving without hesitation now. His voice shook, but no longer with disbelief. Engines straining, we're riding the edge. Edges hold if you know how to walk them, she said. The cabin was chaos made human. Passengers pressed their heads into their knees, clutched hands slick with sweat. Some cried, some whispered. Others stared at the cockpit door, waiting for the steady voice that had become their lifeline. That voice came, clear through the intercom. This is Major Lila Morgan. We are making final approach. You may feel the storm trying to tear us apart. It won't. We will land. Hold fast. The words threaded through panic like steel wire. A mother kissed her child's forehead. An old man unclenched his fists. Edward sat rigid, face ashen, tears staining his cheeks. His wife's eyes lingered on him, unreadable. In the cockpit, Evelyn steadied the captain's head as another violent jolt shook the plane. She glanced at Lila. If you bring this down alive, the world will know what it tried to ignore. I don't fly for the world, Lila murmured. Her hands tightened on the yoke. I fly for those who believe only when they must. Lightning tore the sky open, dazzling white. The plane dipped, alarms shrieking stall warnings. Evan shouted, Airspeed critical! She's going down too fast! Not down, Lila snapped. Through. She eased the nose, coaxed the engines, felt the aircraft respond like a wounded creature finding one last surge of strength. The runway grew larger in the windshield, still blurred, still uncertain. Evan read the gauges, his voice ragged. 300 feet. Crosswinds. Severe. Side drift dangerous. If we land like this... We don't land like this, she cut in. We land like me. She banked into the wind, tilting the jet at an angle no manual dared. The cabin erupted in screams as gravity pulled sideways. Drinks, bags, and prayers spilled across the aisles. The passengers felt the impossible maneuver in their bones. Edward clutched the armrest so hard his knuckles split. But through the terror, he found himself staring forward, whispering a confession no one heard. She's more than I ever deserved to believe in. The wheels skimmed air that tasted of ground but hadn't yet granted it. The runway lights rushed closer, streaks of fragile promise. Evan's voice cracked. 200 feet. Lateral drift. Too high. We'll overshoot. Lila's eyes narrowed. No, we won't. She pulled into a controlled side slip, a maneuver meant for nimble fighters, never for a massive jet. The wind screamed its defiance, the frame rattled like bones breaking, but the nose aligned, the drift corrected, the center line caught in her sight. Evelyn stared, stunned. That's impossible. Lila's lips barely moved. So was surviving the first war zone I flew through. The storm hurled its last fury, slamming hail against the cracked windshield, hammering metal with fists of ice. One shard of glass broke free, slicing across the panel. Evan gasped, ducking instinctively. Lila didn't blink. 100 feet, he called, voice thin with disbelief. Engines at max, gear deployed. This is it. The runway roared closer, wet and gleaming under the floodlights. The plane shuddered, groaned, prayed for relief. Flare, she commanded. The nose lifted fractionally. Tires kissed asphalt with a scream of rubber and rain. The fuselage lurched, bounced once, twice. Metal groaned as though it might shatter. The left wing dipped, nearly grazing the runway, but Lila corrected, her hands iron, her mind unshaken. The jet thundered down the strip, engines howling, brakes screaming, spray exploding in walls of water around them. The storm clawed still, crosswinds trying to shove them into ruin. "Hold!" she roared, as if to the storm itself. The wheels gripped. The skid slowed. The roar softened. The beast of metal and storm bent to her will. Inside, silence fell. Not peace, stunned, suspended silence. Hearts hammered, tears fell. And then, slowly, a ripple of disbelief turned into something else. A child clapped once, uncertain. Then again. The sound grew. Applause broke like thunder of its own, rolling down the cabin, raw with relief, awe, and recognition. Edward wept openly now, not for survival alone, but for the truth that had undone him. His wife didn't touch him. She was watching the cockpit, her eyes reflecting someone she'd never seen before but could no longer ignore. Evelyn checked the captain, relief softening her voice. Alive. Barely, but alive. Evan slumped in his seat, sweat soaking his shirt. He turned to Lila, his eyes wide, his breath uneven. You did it. Lila kept her hands on the yoke, steady, controlled, even as the storm howled uselessly beyond the glass. Her voice was calm. No, she said. We did it. Together. The jet slowed to its final crawl, rolling toward the flood of flashing lights and emergency crews that lined the runway. But in her chest, Lila knew the storm wasn't done, not outside and not within, because survival was one battle. Recognition, respect, redemption. That fight would never end. And as the engines whined into silence, the question lingered in the wet air, heavy and unfinished. What would the world do with a truth it had tried so long to bury? The engines wound down into silence, leaving only the hiss of rain and the muffled thunder retreating across the horizon. The storm had spent itself, but its weight lingered in every body, in every breath that shuddered through the cabin. Emergency crews swarmed the tarmac, red and blue lights flashing against wet asphalt. Medics rushed to the cockpit, their voices sharp with urgency as they carried the unconscious captain onto a stretcher. Evelyn guided them with practiced calm, her own hands still trembling from the storm. Passengers began to unbuckle, rising on shaky legs. Some wept openly. Some hugged strangers as though they were family. Others stood frozen, staring at the woman who emerged from the cockpit, hair damp with sweat, clothes clinging to her like battle armor. Lila Morgan walked into the aisle as if she carried no weight at all, though the storm still pressed against her shoulders. The passengers' eyes followed her, wide and searching. She felt the silence sharpen around her, the hush of awe and disbelief. A child's voice broke it. She saved us. It was small, fragile, but it cracked something open. Applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling until it filled the cabin with a thunder louder than the storm had ever been. Tears streaked faces, hands clapped until they stung. Some shouted her name, though they had only just learned it. Lila nodded once, accepting but not basking. Recognition was rare, and it came late, always late. She walked past them quietly, her steps steady, her eyes forward. Edward stood near the front, trembling. His tie hung undone, his pride scattered in pieces he could never gather again. As she approached, he reached out, voice breaking. Major Morgan, I was wrong. I misjudged you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say it. She stopped, looking at him. For a long moment she said nothing. Her silence pressed heavier than judgment. Then her voice came, quiet, steady. You don't owe me words. You owe yourself honesty. That's punishment enough. He bowed his head, the weight of humiliation settling deeper than fear ever had. Outside, cameras had already gathered beyond the cordons, reporters shouting questions, lenses catching every flash of emergency light. Word had spread faster than the storm. The world knew a crippled aircraft had been guided down by hands no one expected. General Hayes's voice broke through the radio one final time, broadcast across command lines, relayed by ground crews. "Sentinel, the President has been briefed. What you accomplish tonight will change training manuals, change policy, change everything." Lila lowered the handset, her face unreadable. Change was for them. For her, there was only the memory of storms past and the certainty of storms still ahead. Evelyn emerged from the cockpit, wiping her hands on a towel streaked with the captain's blood. She looked at Lila with something close to reverence. "You didn't just land a plane. You forced the world to see." Lila shook her head faintly. "The world sees what it wants, until it can't ignore it anymore." Passengers filed out slowly, some reaching to touch her arm in gratitude, some whispering thanks they could barely form. She accepted each gesture with the same nod, neither dismissing nor embracing, simply acknowledging. Edward lingered behind, his wife's eyes never meeting his. He looked smaller now, a man stripped of everything he thought made him strong. He whispered to himself, words meant for no one. "Privilege isn't competence. I never understood until now." Lila passed him without pause. She had no need for his realization. It came too late, as it always did. On the tarmac, the rain softened into mist. Medics worked over the captain, lights flashing around them. Evan stood nearby, his uniform clinging to his frame, his face pale but alive with something new, belief. He stepped toward her, his voice quiet, reverent. "Major Morgan, I'll never forget this. I'll never forget you." She met his eyes. In them, she saw the reflection of a younger self, the one who had first been doubted, dismissed, overlooked. And she saw what she had given him, the knowledge that survival is not skill alone, but the will to carry others through the storm. "Don't remember me," she said. "Remember what you're capable of when no one believes in you." His throat tightened. He nodded, understanding. She turned toward the terminal lights, her steps carrying her past flashing cameras, past questions shouted into the night. She had no interest in answers. The storm had spoken for her. Behind her, the passengers dispersed into waiting buses, emergency shelters, and headlines already writing themselves. Some would tell the story for years, how an invisible woman had become their salvation. Others would let memory fade, slipping back into their judgments and their blindness. But a few, those who had seen her hands steady the impossible, who had felt belief forced into them by survival, would never again doubt what strength might look like when it didn't wear wealth or privilege. Lila walked on, her body weary, her spirit heavier still. She had carried 300 souls through a storm the world said no one could survive. Yet she knew the hardest storms were not in the sky. They were in the hearts of those who judged without seeing, who doubted without knowing, who would forget the moment recognition was no longer forced upon them. At the edge of the runway, she paused. Rain tapped gently on her face, softer now, like the storm had finally yielded. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, listening not to thunder, not to applause, but to the silence she had always carried. Then she opened them again, stepped forward, and disappeared into the night, not as the invisible passenger she had been, but as the storm's quiet conqueror, seen at last.